Right, Ambassador Dayal, coming to you now. The US used to pride itself in being called a land of immigrants. The country has had a long history of welcoming newcomers, and Los Angeles, by its very nature, is a city of immigrants. But the violent scenes one saw in Los Angeles tells a completely different story. Do you think the US's image as the oldest democracy and the so-called leader of the free world has taken a beating?
Well, Ramesh, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. And I'm delighted that my co-panelist is Saurabh Shukla, who's a very dear friend and someone whom I hold in the highest esteem. And I think he summed up the situation very correctly, pointing out that firstly, it was designed to be a crackdown by the federal authorities on illegal migrants, but it became a confrontation between the federal authorities and the state government of California. And then, of course, it has become a Republican versus Democratic issue because while Trump is a Republican, the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles are Democrats. So this conflict has now become something that is three-dimensional. And as you rightly said, this doesn't reflect very well on America because all the time America has tried to portray itself as the bastion of liberty, as the symbol of democracy. And here is something which is happening, which people are questioning and which is becoming so confrontational in nature. So I think that this is quite worrisome for the American people. And frankly speaking, in all the years that I spent during my posting in the United States, I never witnessed anything of this sort. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, it has now spread to a whole lot of other cities. The sort of confrontation between the authorities and the migrants, which is taking place in California, is now taking place in other cities, in other states also. There are a number of cities which are affected.
Indeed.
And you were right in pointing out that this doesn't go down very well in terms of the imaging as far as the American people are concerned.
Ambassador, is it really about law and order or is it more political? I say that because NBC News of the US says, and I quote it here, it says politically battling it out with a blue state is a winning issue for the Republicans. Now, some context here for our viewers. The state of California, of which the city of Los Angeles is a part of, is an out-and-out Democratic state, a deep blue state, if you will. Now, since 1992, California has voted Democratic in every presidential election. So, could it be more political than anything else?
Well, it has become more political than anything. As I said, it started off as a crackdown on illegal migrants. But then there were other migrants who were legal, who were also being targeted. So the issue snowballed. And then, as I said, it became a confrontation between the federal authorities and the state government because the state government authorities said that the federal government had no right to deploy the National Guards or the Marines in the state of California without their approval. And of course, Trump took use of this very scarcely used provision that it was construed as a rebellion against the federal government. So all this has naturally brought about a confrontation between the federal government and the Democrats who are in majority and who rule California. So it has become a tussle between the Republicans and the Democrats.
Ambassador Dayal, talking about what one can learn from the unseemly visuals coming out of LA, is Los Angeles a warning for both the US government and immigrants alike? One, that aggressive immigration rates can be counterproductive, and two, immigrants everywhere else in the US will be living in fear. To quote the city's mayor, there's a real fear in Los Angeles right now. Parents, workers, grandparents, young people are scared to go about their daily lives.
You know, let me put it very frankly. The United States has always somehow encouraged illegal migrants because a lot of them work on farms and in construction where they are paid less than the prescribed wages. and therefore are useful for the US economy. Now, a crackdown seems to have disrupted a lot of lives. And if people are going to find themselves suddenly being shoved out of the United States, their lives are going to face dislocation. So there is an upsurge, there is a lot of anguish, and people are out on the streets, as you are showing on your screen. And frankly speaking, it's not going to die down so quickly because the level of anxiety is so high that it's resulting in a pour out on the streets.
Ambassador, there's a large Indian community in the US as well. Do you think New Delhi would be watching these developments with some degree of concern?
You know, quite frankly, the bulk of the Indian migrants in the United States are not illegal migrants. They are legal.
Right.
And therefore, I don't think the government of India should be that much concerned. Of course, there are some illegal migrants, people who have gone on visitors' visas and stayed on beyond their visa expiry period. Or, for instance, people who have maybe smuggled across the border from Mexico. There are cases like that. But as I said, the vast majority are legal migrants, and there's nothing to fear about that. However, there is an attitude of unfriendliness which the Trump administration is showing towards migrants in general. There are many policies which are now being implemented. For instance, a tax of 3% on remittances from the United States to outside the country. And even the legal migrants are having to pay that. So it's something that causes discomfort. Let us wait and see how the government of India reacts. But at the moment, in the context of what's happening in Los Angeles and which is spreading to other cities, it is a conflict between the federal authorities and the illegal migrants on one hand, a conflict between the Republicans and the Democrats, and yet again a conflict between the federal authorities and the state government, because the state government feels that the federal authorities are doing things which they are not entitled to do in terms of the Constitution, and therefore they are exceeding their authority.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, thank you very much. Appreciate it.